Professor Gitlitz, who's going to be our moderator.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for coming for what I'm sure is going to be tremendously informative and difficult conversation. I don't know about the rest of you, but I was looking last week at my local property taxes, and they're now slightly over 25% of my pre-tax income. Fortunately, I have a wife who works and has a better job than I do. I guess we all know that we face a tremendous dilemma between taxes, filling up the car with gas, and supplying the services that we need at the local level. So we've asked two people to come and talk to us about the dilemmas of the tax cap at the moment. Can you hear me? Is this working?
Can you not use the mic?
Yes, can I not use the mic? I prefer not to use the mic.
We'll have to
That's why
work
I've
out
been
the
a
kinks,
turn-turn.
it's new, we'll work it out.
So all those lines were lost. I was trying to figure out how to introduce George today, because I'm certain everybody here knows George very, very well. He has been our assemblyman in the State Assembly for the 7th District since 2004. Before that, he served as in the County Board of Legislators, and prior to that is a councilman for the City of Rye. And I suspect all of us know Rich Singerland also very, very well. He has been town manager for the village manager for the Village of Mamaroneck for the last 2 years. Prior to that, he was the village manager of Pelham.
Correct.
And he told me that he's worked for Westchester County now for 25 years.
Communities in Westchester.
Communities in Westchester for 25 years, and I asked him how he manages to take jobs like that and look so young for so long. The format today is going to be, we're going to allow each speaker to speak for about 15 minutes, and that will allow us plenty of time for questions from the audience. And since they are much more informative than I will be, I'm going to turn this over to George.
Thanks, John. I don't know how many of you want to admit to being old enough to remember Red Skelton. I do. Everybody? Probably if you raised your hands, you're in that magic 50-plus category. But I remember watching Red Skelton on Tuesday nights on CBS in my parents' house. And he had that long-gone variety show where he'd do different characters, and he'd have a guest star on, and there'd be musical performances. And in the middle of the show, he'd always do a sketch. It was either Freddie the Freeloader or Clem Cadiddlehopper. Anybody remember that? You don't have to raise your hand. Just nod your head so I know. And I remember distinctly, I've used this line 100 times in my public career, when he would tell a joke, and when he was doing these skits, he would break the fourth wall and look out into the audience all the time. And they had a studio audience. And when he'd tell a joke that bombed, he'd turn to the audience and he'd say, "I just tell him, I don't explain him." And then he'd go on in the skit. I'm here today to tell you about the tax cap. My role for today is informational. I asked for this job, and I got it, and so it will ultimately be my responsibility to cast a vote on it, and then, more importantly, to try to implement, as part of a legislature, the aftermath of what happens as what we do. But my purpose for these 15 minutes, and John has got me on a short leash, he's going to stand when I hit the magic mark, and I will shut up and sit down, is to try to be, at this stage of the game, informational. This is a public policy issue to be debated. This is a public policy position for which those of us in the State Assembly have yet to cast a vote. But it is a public policy issue that isn't just an activity that happens up in Albany. It will affect, if it comes to pass, every single government service that we receive from the local governments. In this audience, Mayor of Mamaroneck Village, Mayor of Larchmont have been introduced already, village trustees, school board representatives from different school districts, all affected, library board trustees, the whole shooting match. So what we're going to talk about today is New York State's proposal on a tax cap, on a property tax cap. Now, a tax cap can mean a lot of different things. In principle, it's not hard to understand. It creates a ceiling, a limit on how much taxes can be imposed. However, the bill that we have before you, some of you I've sent a copy of the bill to. How many of you got a copy of the bill? Raise your hand. How many of you actually read the bill? Raise your hand. Anybody who wants an actual copy of the bill, I'm happy to email it to you later on today, and then you can read it. It's 26 pages of legal language for which those of us who are laymen struggle through and try to interpret as best as possible. And this is subject to any amendments that may yet happen. But A tax cap can mean different things. What it means in this particular piece of legislation is a cap on how much the overall tax levy as created by the local government or taxing authority for a given year can be. In other words, and by the way, let me just back up. This proposal affects the county government, small city governments, which would be City of Rye, City of New Rochelle, Mount Vernon, and so forth. It affects all of the towns in the state of New York, all of the villages in the state of New York. It affects all of the school districts in the state of New York, with some exceptions, which I'll mention in a second. It affects special districts. We have a library district in Mamaroneck. It affects that. There's a library district in New Rochelle. It affects that. In some places, not in this area, there are fire districts. Eastchester is a fire district. In some places, there may be ambulance districts, sewer districts, a host of those special districts. This applies to any level of government that levies a property tax. And basically what it does is it says that the amount of money that you as a governing body structure for property taxes, how much that as a revenue will help fund your services, will be limited from year 1 to year 2 by 2% or the CPI, Consumer Price Index, regionalized. It's a calculation made by the state controller, whichever is less. Whichever is less. Okay? So if you see CPI at 3-4% in an inflationary time, that may happen. 2% is your tax cap. In a time where inflation is not growing and CPI falls under 2%, that becomes the tax capped number. A year ago, Governor Patterson authored a bill that had a 4% tax cap, which did not get through the state legislature. And in different states, and I know I've got some questions here, and to the extent that I can answer them, different states have imposed different types of caps with different other provisions, some exemptions, etc. This bill is 2% or CPI, whichever is less. And it applies to all those jurisdictions. Who does it not apply to? It does not apply to the city of New York. It does not apply to the big 5 school districts: Yonkers, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany. So those 5 school districts do not fall under this, neither does the city of New York, which means that those jurisdictions may continue to tax at whatever level it does under the existing regulations and rules. There are not votes for school budgets in those big city districts. There's no vote for New York City budget. So this applies to school districts other than those and all the remaining counties and jurisdictions in the state. This issue is omnipresent. John said it, I think, accurately. Anybody who's an elected official in this room or has been an elected official, even has run for public office, win or lose, knows that if you knock on 10 doors in a row, and Lord knows I have knocked on more doors than I can count in my life, the majority of comments that come back to you is about their level of property taxation. It's not every single door, but it is the majority of conversation that you hear. It is the single most prominent issue in the suburbs, and I would argue if it isn't the single most prominent issue upstate, then it's tied with jobs in the general economy. But people talking about how high their property tax bill is the single most talked about public policy issue that I have heard in my years in public office. Many people do not use all of the services that a government of some sort provides. And when I say government now, I'm including the school district because it's the product of education, a singular one, in the same way that the library district provides a singular service of library services. But there are people who live in our communities who don't use certain services. Now, you know that you have a fire department. In the case of Mamaroneck Village, it's a volunteer department. In the other communities, it has a paid component as well as a volunteer component. But unless you have a fire, you don't use the fire department. It's good that you know it's there. It serves as an insurance policy. It affects your insurance on your house and the level that that's included upon. But you don't necessarily use the fire department every day. You don't use the police department every day. You do use Westchester County's sewer system every day. You don't think about it because it disappears from sight, which is a good thing, particularly at a breakfast conversation. You may not use mass transit every day, which is a public service provided by Westchester County. You may never use mass transit, just as a rule, and I won't raise my hand because I can't say I have. How many of you have been on a Beeline bus in the last year? Even once. Once on a public bus system. Okay. Now, if we lived in Manhattan, every hand would go up because of the nature of the use of mass transit in New York City, or Manhattan specifically, if not the outer boroughs. But not everybody uses every service. We know that the most expensive public service is education. And roughly, my rough number, roughly about a quarter of the households in any community at any one point in time have a direct student in the system, roughly. Maybe a little higher, a little lower, depending on the circumstances. It gets different when you get into communities that have many more apartment buildings, and the balance between who pays the property taxes and who's actually going to school and where they live are different. But in communities like this, it's about that. So I'm not surprised when I knock on the door, somebody comes to me and they say, what's on your mind? And they say, the taxes are killing me. Now, they might mean sales tax, but they generally don't. They might mean income tax, but they generally don't. They generally mean property taxes, because that's levied in a way that is not related to your income. Now, sales tax isn't either, but you have some negotiability with sales tax. If I go to the store and I need to buy a pair of slacks, and somebody tells me the slacks are $100, and I want to save money, I'm not worried about saving the 7.75 or 8.25 sales tax. I just buy a pair of slacks that are less expensive. If you watch the way I dress every day, you'll know that's my generic answer to saving money. But I have some flexibility, so the sales tax doesn't hit me the same way. It's possible that over the course of the year, the sales tax may be a higher percentage of my income than is proportionate, but you don't feel it the same way. On income tax, for those who have withholding as part of their employment and get a paycheck, much of your tax burden, you complain about it when the taxes are done, but you don't feel it in the same way. For those who have to make lump sum payments, obviously it's a different thing. However, when you pay your taxes, you feel it every month in a mortgage payment, or if you've already paid off your mortgage, you feel it in lump sum bills that are not small. So when a senior citizen comes to me and says the taxes are killing me, I get it. When a young couple comes to me and says the taxes are killing me, I get it. Now the question is, how best to reduce that burden? This proposal is the proposal to reduce that burden that's come from Governor Cuomo, and it's been passed by the New York State Senate. Passed by a vote of 47 to 15, bipartisan vote. Every Republican in the Senate voted for this bill. Half of the Democrats voted for it. Half of them voted against it. Every person who voted against it is from New York City, with the exception of Ruth Hassel Thompson, who lives in Mount Vernon, but represents a district that's mostly the Bronx. What does this bill do? In this bill, and I'll send it to you, you can read it yourself, this does following things. It establishes an allowable levy growth factor. That's your tax cap. And it says, what I said a second ago, that from year to year, the tax levy cannot exceed 2% or the CPI or whatever is lower. I've mentioned who it applies to: county, city, town, village, fire district, special district, with those exceptions. It starts in the fiscal year for the school, for the municipal governments that are on calendar years. It would start, if it's passed this year, that'll be voted on probably by the end of June. It would affect the 2012 town budget for our purposes here, county budget as our purposes here, which means the discussions that will happen in the fall leading to a December adoption of a town or a county budget, city, if you live in Rye City as I do, budget. It will apply to the school district budget in 2012-13. And then different special districts have different dates for when it would apply. In most cases, it'll be a 12-13 year when it applies, if it passes. There are two obvious exceptions that are in this bill that are exempted out of the tax cap, out of the tax levy limitation. One of them is if there is a legal settlement for a tort action that exceeds 10% of your tax levy. A tort action like, as those of us in county government have experienced, somebody dies at a ride at Playland, and there's a lawsuit, and there's a big settlement. If that settlement exceeds 10% of the tax levy, then that can get calculated out of the cap so that you can pay that tort action. That's one exemption. The other exemption applies only at the county level of government, and it has to do with the amount of direct cash assistance that is required for TANF, welfare, as we know it. In essence, the county pays for percentages of these numbers, and if those numbers go up because there are needy families, that amount would be exempted from the tax. Those are the only exceptions to the tax cap, as proposed in this bill. If you look at the New Jersey model, there are a variety of exemptions and exceptions. And if you go around the different states that have tax caps, and there's something to the tune of 20 plus, 25 plus states that have some version of a tax cap, there are a variety of different exemptions. As the bill stands today, those are the two exemptions that exist. In both cases, it's the state controller that will determine what is the prior year levy upon which the 2% is based. There are provisions to prepare a budget that has more than a 2%, to use the general number, levy, but it requires a 2/3 vote of the governing authority if you are a town, city, village, county government. Now, I've been told that there's a provision for referendum in those levels of government. As I've read the bill does not state that. So the bottom line is that if 2/3 of the county board of legislators, 2/3 of the village board of Mamaroneck, 2/3 of the town council, 4 minutes, is that what this, okay, then that override provision would kick in. In the case of the school district, and I assume the library districts, because there's a built-in referendum component to their budgets as it is, the voter referendum must approve the higher level of taxation above that level, and that's at 60%. And if you go in with, they say, a 3.5% tax increase, and you put it before the voters, school district, library district, as a referendum, if the referendum fails to get 60%, you don't have a contingency, you drop to a 0 increase. Same budget levy as last year. So in essence, there's a penalty for going for an override and failing to get it. You don't just get the 2%. You say you want a 3.5, you don't get ratcheted back to the 2, you get ratcheted back to a 0. That's what's at stake for a school district if they push the override vote. The bottom line in all of this is that the individual's taxes is not what's capped in this. If a major business in the flats is able to get a major tax reduction, that doesn't change the total levy that the town needs, or the village of Mamaroneck needs, or the school district of Mamaroneck needs. That levy stays the same. Who pays percentages of that levy changes in an assessment if a major employer gets a certiorari, which means your personal taxes might go up under a tax capped situation. The levy won't go up. Now, obviously, if you make improvements to your house and your house is assessed at a higher level, you had some wing on or something, that obviously will change your assessment, will change your taxes regardless of the tax cap. What the tax cap also doesn't govern is when the county government parcels out the percentage that each community pays. I know I'm losing you, I know it's boring, but if I'm like Elizabeth Taylor's 8th husband. If I knew how to make it interesting, I know I'm supposed to do, but I don't know how to make it interesting. You've had 7 husbands before me. So it is what it is. When the county portions out its taxes through equalization, you know, Judy, now, and in my experience, you come in and you say, hey, we cut overall levy by 2%, but community A might have an increase, community B might have a decrease. Well, that fell within the tax cap levy, but you, the resident of a community that got an 8% increase, would pay 8% more in county property taxes. So this is not a fail-safe. It doesn't mean it's bad, per se. It just means you need to know clear-eyed what the law does and what it doesn't do. I'm going to sit down except to say that this legislation, nowhere in it, has any provision to reduce any mandated expenses that drive the cost of government at any of these levels of government for which we would cap. There is a presumption behind the philosophy, and the philosophy is that local governments are spendthrift, and we need to rein them in because they don't know how to rein themselves in. That's the philosophy behind it. Now, what's the reality of it? You have a $550 million county tax levy total all across the county. 210 of it is a check sent to the state of New York to cover Medicaid costs, which the county does not administer. All right, I'm not a county official crying at the state. I'm in the state government, and I clear-eye understand that that Medicaid mandate is 40% of the cost of the levy that happens. I don't sit in Norm Rosenblum's seat or Josh Mandel's seat, but when they get their budgets and they're looking at them, they are getting a bill from the state controller that is telling them how much their government is going to have to contribute to pensions. That is not factored in to any tax cap. If they get a bill in order to keep the retirement system solvent, the village of Mamaroneck will have to pay that and will still be under the 2% tax cap if the law passes. There is as yet, 60 days to go, no companion legislation that would sufficiently relieve burdens by which you could say, okay, I understand I've got to keep my property taxes here, but at the same time, you at the state are going to reassess, you're going to rejigger the costs that I have that you're mandating, and that will allow me to do that.
I'm going to pass it to Rich, who's going to explain how he's going to rein in the spendthrift spender.
So, I'm here today as a village manager, somebody with experience in government, but also, right now I'm also one of the representatives to the state group known as the New York Conference of Mayors. And they've actually put out a policy statement, which I was discussing with the other managers last week. It's called "You Can't Cap What You Can't Control." And part of the issue is what happens with the issues, the spending, the funding that we have to deal with. I did a rough calculation when the budget was introduced for the board in Mamaroneck of what actually is happening in the village of Mamaroneck. We originally proposed a 5.95% property tax increase. We ended up last night at 4.58. But as part of that spending increase, 1.3% of it roughly is operations. 2.5% is the pension. That's just the increase. About, in 2002, the expense to the village for pension was $25,000 roughly, give or take. This year, the expense for the pension is approaching $2 million. The pension has lost 25% of value just based on the economy and their investments. Josh Mandel was making some excellent points the other night to the representative from the state controller's office, who is the sole administrator of the pension system. But these are the kind of things we have to deal with. We've gone from virtually zero to $2 million expense over the course of 10 years because of the economy and what we have to contribute for retirees. And another part of the problem is you've got employees, especially uniformed officers and firefighters, who work for 20 years, and then they may be retired after 20 years, go on to a second job, but the pension is paid for them for up to 40 or more years. So you've got people who put in a short amount of time and get twice as long of a benefit from the municipalities to be able to fund that. So there's a lot of different things that put pressure on municipalities that we have to deal with. I mean, NICOM's report, kind of gives a picture like Martini out of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Everybody's sitting and playing cards, and he says, "Hit me, hit me." And the answer is, "Well, you already have 21." It's, "Hit me, hit me, hit me." We don't have additional sources to come up with money to cover everything. The village's state aid really isn't that much, a huge amount of money. I think our current state aid is about $160,000 a year. The bigger benefit to us are other things that the state has enacted, like the additional sales tax, which the county shares as well. But it gives us additional sources of revenue. Right now, I think the sales tax is somewhere in the range of about $2.5 million. So it's quite a bit more than the revenue sharing would have been if it had been kept on the same track it was for 10 or 15 years ago, which it probably would have been about $500,000 now, with 4% annual increases. So some of the things that NICOM, in their policy report, some of the issues that they make are, prior to the 2.5% Massachusetts property tax cap, spending far exceeded the national, property taxes far exceeded the national average, but local government spending did not. So again, go back to the 1.3% operational spending, and then look at the 2.5% pension payment, which is not excluded, as George mentioned, it's not excluded under the tax cap. So if we have to come up with a 25% increase or 35% increase in the pension payment, if we have to come up with 2.5% of our total budget in pension payment, you're approaching layoffs for 4, 5, 6 employees just to cover that gap right there. So is there fat at local government or any government level? Yes. But there's another perspective on this that I also discussed with Congresswoman Lowy a couple of months ago. We had a meeting discussing how different municipalities, how different levels of government can do things. And the village, when I was in Pelham, had received a federal grant to add parking for the train station. And people were looking at what the other options could be. The board wanted me to talk to Metro North to see if they would take over the lot and take over the administration of it and take over the grant to build the parking. So the village had one employee, me, plus my assistant and contracted engineer to help design the project. I think we had about $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 in federal grants to build parking, expand our parking lots. what we got from Metro North was a group of 10 people to say, this is the team we need to administer the grant, where at the local level it's only 2. So there's not always efficiency to be found at the local government level that couldn't be found by looking at higher levels of government and looking at ways that governments could be consolidated. There's tons of authorities across New York State that consume a huge amount of tax dollar that people don't always think about. So to start with, a tax cap won't make government services cost less. We already have contracts, we already have contracts for police, fire, public works employees that are in place. So it's extremely unlikely that we would have any kind of salary reduction for those employees or benefit reduction. What the village was just able to approve with our union negotiations for CSEA last night was a give back of management rights. In the past, there were provisions in the contract that required how many men and how many trucks we put out on our garbage routes. We got that language out, and immediately, as of June 1st, we're going to be saving $100,000 a year. But there's additional things like that that we would have to achieve to reach to get under the 2.5% property tax cap. And last night we adopted a 4.58% property tax cap. There's a lot of different perspectives. Claim that caps will produce large savings through efficiencies are overblown. It's what you're not going to do is have efficiencies. You're going to cut back on services. So the more with less, at some point, is just going to be less with less. Tax caps can be particularly harmful if adopted during a weak economy. So in Massachusetts, Proposition 2.5 took effect during a period of extraordinary economic growth. The Massachusetts miracle, state revenue and state aid was rising, whereas the tax cap was putting limits on. Now, I'm a resident of Westchester. I live in Ossining. I'm not saying that taxes are getting, extremely high. It's very difficult for us to pay. But is a tax cap without some kind of relief measures, like George said, sending it to the public to vote on, to override, if they're in dire straits, there should be allowances for communities to vote on that. I was doing some research on Texas as well, and they made some interesting comments that they're trying to do some weird things to accomplish what they have. Texas has a tax cap as well. They're getting into advertising on school buses. They're dealing with trying to find alternative revenues, and they don't have them. The school superintendent in the rural town of Hodo, Texas, has taken steps to trademark the district's mascot in a frantic effort to raise cash. He's putting advertisements on school buses and letting retailers have space on the school website to advertise for products. He said, "I'm doing some weird stuff in the district because we're low on money, sitting in an office full of hippo figurines to sell to people." So while they're trying to sell these things, the school board have agreed to shut down a school, cut 10% of the staff, including a principal, 2 principals, 4 librarians, and 38 teachers. The round of staff cuts is just a first step, and more layoffs will follow. So it's the bigger opportunity, or the exchange of opportunities, is mandate relief. There's a lot of mandated payments and other things. The Wicks law adds 20% easily to publicly bid contracts. Prevailing wage probably adds another 20% to publicly bid low-level contracts. Under state law, every contract, if we have a cleaning company come in to clean Village Hall for every month, and they do it, it costs a few $100s a month, prevailing wage has to apply to that as well, and that cost increases 20 to 30%. So these are the kind of things that municipalities have to deal with, and then you say you have a tax cap. You need if you want the tax cap, there needs to be relief on the mandate side as well. Another model is what happened in the state of California. California enacted a tax cap called Proposition 13. and their tax is 1% of the value of a home. In New York, I think it's approaching 4%. But that's on average. The thing to keep in mind is that also in wealthier communities, especially those in Westchester, you're going to find communities able to override the property tax cap because they want to maintain services, they don't want to lose police, they don't want to lose teachers. The poorer communities that don't have the ability to pay will not be able to override the tax caps, and they will end up making the cuts and have a reduction in services and a reduction in services provided through school systems and things like that, reduction in level of education. So there's a lot of balancing and additional research that needs to be done to make changes to the state property tax level, to the 2% cap, or whatever it ends up being, to accommodate these kind of considerations. So it's another issue is something that happened in Japan over 200 years ago, believe it or not. The Meiji Restoration happened in Japan because they had tons of little domains and communities with separate little governments, and the shogun were, the military service officers who ran around and helped protect people from roaming bands of brigands. At the point where they actually reenacted an emperor system of government and tried to consolidate the governments, they went from 300 domains and they reduced the number to 75 to make government more equalized, to standardize the system of government across the country. They had people coming in, Western civilizations coming in, trying to perform different systems of trade with the country of Japan, and they found that they were so outdated then, and not that they are anymore. Although something like the tsunami we see that has had a horrible impact on the country, but they went from a very backwards, under-civilized country to a very highly civilized, highly technological country. And part of that is making a bigger system of government, reducing layers and layers of government. New York State has so many different layers of government. You've got the state, then you've got the county, then you've got the cities, the towns, the villages, school systems, fire districts, lots, water authorities, sewer authorities, parking authorities. All these different layers of governments employ staff and put the revenues into little silos that don't go back to the community at large. So these are the kind of things that need to be considered, again, as part of a consolidation, tax cap, control on government spending.
We'll open it up for questions. Oh, you got a lot. Norm. We'll put Norm.
The problem, I think, with the proposed 2% tax cap is not the specifics. It's very appealing on a marketing level. It's understandable why 80% of the population of New York State thinks it's a great idea, because all I hear is my taxes aren't going to go up 2%. I think that there is a severe problem with information going out as to what the real effect is. As George mentioned, we have non-funded mandates that are not going to be covered. The reality is, I believe that part of this concept, and Rich actually just touched on it, is that I believe Cuomo, and I agree 100% with Cuomo, you must bring New York State within financial restrictions if it's going out as a bankrupt state. However, while it's very popular to have a 2% tax cap, the end result is that there's going to be a Queens mentality. And by that, exactly what Rich noted, the villages and towns as we know it will cease to exist. Because what's going to happen is with this 2% tax cap, it's going to be a catch-22 and a spiral downward, because you're going to be forced to have a budget that's limited by a number certain, but you're going to have to cut to meet it. You're going to cut your school, you're going to cut your jobs and the benefits and the services by the village and the town. What's going to happen
is you go back to your marketing concept, and that is the very reason why people move and choose to live here will disappear. And it's just going to continue to go down, the taxes will go up, and you're going to end up bankrupting this. And it's seen, you're doing in that direction now in New York State. It's seen in California, and I believe that it has to be, the ultimate irony is, as I believe George mentioned, those that representatives from New York City voted against it, and the clear majority that voted for it are the very towns and small villages that are going to disappear. So,
Let me just, and do you mind if I sit down? Do I have to stand?
You can sit down.
I'll try to be loud. I think the key element Norm pointed out is that the popularity of this idea polls about 4-1 in favor. And it's because of what we said right at the outset. Property taxes are high. They're higher here than just about any place else in the country, not Westchester alone, New York State as a state. Jersey and us run 1 and 2. It doesn't matter which one is 1 or 2 because we're both right at the top. And and as I said earlier, many people don't. It's not that they're stupid. They just don't. They're busy living their lives. They have their careers. They have their families. They don't delve into how a service is delivered and what the cost is. They're on the train to the city. They're raising their children. They're doing the things that are important to them, and they get a bill. And they say, what justifies this if I could live someplace else and spend a lot less? So the idea is extremely popular. Now the problem is it takes 19 paragraphs to craft something that will reduce your taxes, which is the mission here, and at the same time not upset apple carts, because here's what happens. When we talk about some of these different mandates, why do they exist? Why do we have binding arbitration for police contracts? Why do we have 20-year retirements for police and fire? Why do we have 55 years of age, 30 years of service retirement benefits? Why do we have a Triborough Amendment? Why do we have Wick's Law? Why do we have prevailing wage? All of these things and more, I could name another 15 things like that. They were all negotiated by entities that don't want to lose those benefits. When we talk about trying to get Medicaid costs under control, nursing homes and hospitals say our financial viability is based on this level of resources. And this nursing home will go out of business, or this hospital will go out of business, and all the jobs, and the employees, I might add. And while it may seem like it's just unions, it's not just unions, it's businesses as well. There are businesses that are based on certain kinds of decisions and realities. So when we say things like, how do we cut and deal with it in a way that's prudent and realistic, and the state officials say, you know what, here's the bottom line. Put a tax cap on. A tax cap everybody understands, and the tax cap doesn't cost the state government a dime. The tax cap does not cost the state government one dime to administer. It's now your problem. Now, I've worked in corporate America. I've had bosses who came in to me and said, George, here's your budget for the year. Bang, it's going down 10%. Bang, your revenues need to be up 15%. Do it or else. No discussion. Can't do it, there's somebody else out in the marketplace that would be happy to have your job. And in corporate America, in theory, if I like that, I don't like it, I can move to another job if I want to. But here in this structure, in this situation, the state decision makers, however they've gone so far, the tax cap is the easiest thing, Norm. It's a popular thing, and we're on the path to do it. Crafting in the next 60 days a viable mandate relief package. 60 days, that's what we've got to work with. 60 days, a viable mandate relief package that Josh and Heidi and you and Ann has been on the board, Jane is on the board. You can look at it and you can say, you know what, I could live with a cap because I'm going to have these things relieved. And if we don't do that, then, we're going to see a very difficult situation. And I might add, the first time that there is a certiorari action in a community, and your residential cost goes up, even with the tax cap in, or the county's allocation of money in this particular year, the equalization rate zaps you, or your Rye-Neck, where you have an equalization rate between two communities, and one of the two communities suffers, Mamaroneck Strip in Mamaroneck Town, and they get a SCARS rate, it suffers, someone's going to say, hey, tax cap, I thought it was going to keep my thing at 2%. What's this? And then it's going to take 19 paragraphs, and then generally what happens is, don't bother me with the details. I want somebody new in office because I want my taxes down.
I see a sort of disturbing trend here, because I think one of the reasons why property taxes are so high is that the top income tax rates have been incrementally lowered. And I saw this year that the legislator allowed a true millionaire's tax to sunset. As a result, there's not a lot of state aid. I know I'm in the Rhinebeck School District, we get a minuscule amount. So of course it falls upon the property taxpayers to make up the difference. And I feel like the people who are going to suffer are the people who do use the services, use the public schools, the people who property taxes are hitting hard, whereas there's a group that seems to be fairly unscathed at the very top income levels, and Wall Street too. We talk about pension costs. Well, one of the reasons why it's so extraordinary is because of the losses suffered by our pension funds. If we hadn't had those losses 3 years ago, if we hadn't had that whole financial meltdown, it wouldn't be the same situation with the pension costs. It's not that pension benefits are that extraordinary, and they're really not. So I'd like to hear your thoughts, particularly George, on the whole income tax intersection with property taxes.
Well, the bottom line is that if New York State did not require the Medicaid cost to be paid, if New York State did not, have an MTA payroll tax, which is not a huge financial mandate, but it is an across-the-board mandate which was imposed from the top down. Those and other types of mandates, if we paid for it at the state level, we'd be paying for it primarily out of income tax and business taxes, which are the two major revenue streams at the state level. The state does not levy property taxes, as you know. Because the economy, the investments, as Heidi said, are down, that's a factor we all live with personally. We live with that. It affects sales tax, though sales tax revenue is slightly rebounding lately. We took a bad hit on sales tax, so the sales tax revenue piece of everybody's budget has been affected dramatically by what happened in the downturn in the economy. So the income tax scenario has been, those of us who view taxation as being appropriate, because there is this philosophy, and some of you hold that philosophy, and it's a perfectly valid point of view, that taxation is confiscatory, and that I don't want to pay for things that I don't use. And when you go to some states, Texas, South Carolina, that is the dominant political philosophy in those states. So in this state, that has not been the dominant philosophy. However, over the course of the last battle over the budget, the extension of the, what's called the millionaire's tax was eliminated. The governor and the Senate were absolute about eliminating them, and so they're gone. And that's a revenue that would have been about $700 million this year, and that revenue stream is gone. And of course, the state financed its budget without that revenue stream, and it did so by cutting $1.2 billion in school aid, and that has an actual effect on Mamaroneck and Rhinebeck and the other districts and so forth. To be candid with you, those of us who sit in this room, Mamaroneck, Larchmont, Town, and Village, are not ground zero. I grew up in Mount Vernon. I've heard this story 100 times, those of you who've heard me. I grew up on the south side of Mount Vernon, went to Grimes Elementary School, African-American neighborhood. I don't know what Mount Vernon's doing. I mean, their loss of state aid is devastating to both school district and city government. They have people in need, and they need proportionally more police, more fire, per capita individuals because of the realities of their circumstances. But let me say this. We are practical people. The question, is not how would I deconstruct the world and remake it in a different way. This is what we have today. We have an economy that has not rebounded, and when it does rebound, it's not going to look the way it did in 2006. That's reality. We have a reality if we calculate to the future, the long future, the pension obligations that we've created, the Medicaid obligations we've created, the Social Security, federal, obligations we've created. I'm part of that baby boom generation. The front edge is just hitting senior citizenhood. When my cohort hits it, we're mid-baby boom generation. The calculation of those numbers are frightening. So somewhere along the line, decision makers, I'm one of them, but decision makers in Washington, Albany, and locally, we're going to have to deal with a reality that is ugly. U-G-L-Y. Ugly. And we can push it off a little bit, and we can do things that will solve the next election cycle. But having run 12 times, the last election means nothing, and the next election means everything until the next election becomes the last election. In which case, decisions like Carl McCall, whom I supported, decided as state controller that he could rescind having people make contributions to their retirement plan after 10 years. That was a very popular decision if you're a public employee. You applauded him. The economy allowed for it in 2001. And it helped him get the nomination for governor in 2002. Does anybody remember or care what happened in the election in 2002? That policy is still with us. Still with us. And to reestablish that contribution takes a state constitutional amendment. That's the way the law is structured.
All right, in view of the reality, it seems from what you're saying is that there is going to be a 2%, there is going to be that 2% tax cap. And the only way that we have, those of us who do not like the idea, is to look at tax relief. And not tax relief, but the mandate relief.
Lynn, my sense is...
How much of a reality is that,
Well,
that could happen?
Okay, here's the, you know, I haven't said this publicly. You interpreted the way I phrased these things. The reality is that if New York City is not subject to this cap, and there are 65 members of the legislature, the assembly, that represent New York City, they could vote for or against the cap, and it doesn't affect them directly. Philosophically, most of my upstate colleagues, I don't want to be partisan about it, so I won't, but they have more of a conservative bent. Their voters are even more anti-tax than what we feel in this area. It's not hard to envision a majority of the assembly voting for the tax cap. So the question now becomes, what prudent modifications to the cap,
Right.
and what real mandate relief can be done practically? How likely is it? That's the next 60 days. If we had, I mean, there's a variety of things. If you said the governments are only going to pay, they're going to be capped at 2%, but they're only going to pay 2% more year over year in pension contribution, what would that do? As opposed to open-ended increase in pension contribution. Now, that's me and Rich talking about that, and you explaining to me the numbers in Mamaroneck Village. What does that mean in Larchmont? Is that a different number in Larchmont? What does it mean if we were to take back the, and I know this is small numbers, if we were as a state to exempt municipal governments, school districts included, well, school districts are supposed to be reimbursed, but exempt municipal governments from the MTA payroll tax. What savings does that do, Norm, to Mamaroneck Village? And can you piece together an argument that says we need to have that, and can you find political support for that? I can't predict that. I can only tell you that that is the companion argument that has to go along with the 2% tax cap. Because the two of those things together, you can manage a tax cap, you can provide the relief that people want, in theory, if that comes to pass the way people hope, and at the same time not cripple the government so that the government says, you know what, there's only one way out of this: less cops, less firefighters, you know, in extremis, close a school, you know. And I know I'm talking a lot, but I just want to add one other piece to this, just if I may. And I think Norm brought it up as part of his commentary. My colleagues from New York City, not just elected colleagues, and many of the people who serve in Albany for 20, 30 years in state government, do not respect local, small governments and districts. That's a subjective statement on my part. They don't respect them. They think, they believe, I've had colleagues tell me this in Brooklyn and Queens, you got all these little Mamaronecks and, you know, they make a joke out of it. Rye Neck, Rye Brook, Rye City, rye on toast, you know, ham on rye. Why do you have all these little ryes? And I said, let me tell you what, it may look to you like it's a big joke, but there's a difference, I assume you all know, between the town of Mamaroneck and the village of Mamaroneck. Different demographics, different personality, different politics, different priorities. When you merge those things together into a larger entity, groups feel unrepresented in that merged entity. And you're in a room where you can talk to the mayor right now of two of your communities and the village manager, and you feel a sense of connectedness. You can talk to a school board superintendent. In New York City, what are you complaining about? You can't get to Kathy Black or Walcott or Joel Klein. You have no way to reach Bloomberg. You have no control over your government, no sense of anything. Even at the county level. Even at the county level, you can get to your county legislator. No, I'm not knocking Rob Estorino per se. It's true with Andy Spano. You can't get to the county executive. You might see him. He might speak to you. But you can't sit with him over coffee and say, here's what I'm thinking. So I argue all the time that there is an underappreciation for what small government delivers in terms of quality of service, but you can't throw additional burdens on that because the perception is, well, the reason why you're spending too much money, too many police chiefs, too many superintendents of schools, too many high-priced people. Take a look at the Larchmont Village budget and tell me what's high-priced in that budget. I want to know, because I've looked at it. That, and I've said this 100 times publicly, that's a Jeffersonian democracy budget if there ever was one. And I came out of Rise City where the councilmen aren't paid. And let me tell you, the New York City councilmen, they're paid all right, boy, I'll tell you. So my point in all of this, Lynn, is the argument is not just convince people about the mandate relief, it's convince them that the Mamaronecks and the Larchmonts and the Rise and the Rybrooks, that they matter, that they matter.
Rich, you want to? Sure. I was reading a book that I took a look at about 10 years ago. It's called 2020 Visions, a vision of where the world will be in 2020. They predicted that we would see population shifts of between 50 and 60 million between when they wrote the book back in 1990 and 2020. I was checking the census figures last night. Between 2000 and 2010, the United States population grew by almost 30 million people. That's almost 10%. Didn't happen here in New York because people don't want to come here because of the taxes. We're actually losing 2 congressional seats, so we'll have less representation in Congress. The biggest thing that they said to offset the property taxes, when you say property taxes, really you're talking about people who own houses, who live in apartments, who own condos. The problem in New York State is that we don't have enough jobs, we don't have enough industry. Our annual budget's about $29 some odd million. We've lost $1.5 million in mortgage tax, sales tax, building permits, and interest earnings. Interest earnings are $70,000, $80,000 a year because of what we're allowed to invest in under state law. But frankly, we don't want to get into a situation like Orange County, California, where we're investing in derivatives and we lose everything, God forbid. But in turn, the expenses on the opposite side, our pension is approaching nearly 10% of our budget. And unless that kind of stabilizes and equalizes somehow, it's going to make us lay off police officers, close schools. Some places, I grew up in Yonkers, so I'm more than familiar with fiscal crises. They were shutting the libraries, they were turning off streetlights, they were laying off or furloughing employees for a week or 2. There was ultimately a financial control board enacted on Yonkers that lasted for decades. And you can only spend what you have. That really becomes the bottom line.
Carol.
One of the things that I think is most confusing for just the average person about the conversation we're having is the difference between tax rate, and the actual levy. The budget to budget, we can all our municipalities can be very responsible and be under 2%, but as the revenue pool decreases, the tax rate, what each of us pays, increases. And I think that's part of the problem, is that the tax cap is on that levy. And if it were saying, listen, we're going to all be responsible, we're going to keep our budgets as tight as we can, notwithstanding the fact that we have continued increases from the state that are mandates, as well as infrastructure issues, because all of us have aging infrastructures. We all have roads and bridges and whatever it is, buildings that need massive renovations, and especially more so as time goes on. And that is probably one of my major concerns, is that you have to allow for the fact that things happen. And, and to have an intractable budget scenario to me doesn't make any sense. So obviously, George, you've heard me say mandate relief should include some relief for construction issues, things that we cannot avoid, that we have to do to keep up our buildings, our roads, whatever it might be. And also, in light of the fact that we have a declining revenue, to look at it budget to budget is a whole different thing than looking at it by what is the levy.
Peter.
George, is there any discussion at this point about maintaining local control in this way, giving us the opportunity to present the budget that we feel our community would support, and then perhaps, if that doesn't succeed, go back to a 2% cap, as opposed to this permanent 2% cap that never disappears?
I think at this point, Peter, the honest answer is no. That I think there is a bias that says that the school budget votes that occur are not reflective of the will of the broad base of people. Now, I'm not telling you what I think, I'm not telling you what I believe, I'm telling you what I think people believe, to answer your question. The sense is that when school budgets get passed 53% to 47%, whatever number of votes that means, that the total turnout of voters is not significant enough to be reflective of the overall community. And that is the rationale why the override vote is at 60%. Now, there are certain laws we have in the country that require supermajority votes. If you're going to do certain things in a governmental body, it requires two-thirds to override an executive veto, two-thirds to do certain things in zoning and planning on a municipal board. But, we generally don't say you have to get 60% to be elected to Congress or 60% to get elected to the state assembly. But in this particular case, the thinking, the arguments that I've heard is that because school votes don't draw from the community at large enough, that it's going to take 60% of those people showing up to vote to be an honest reflection that, yes, the community at large is ready to go above the 2% cap. And as I mentioned, and I'll repeat it again if you missed it, not Peter knows this obviously, is that there's a default back to zero. So there's a risk. What basically this law says is if you want to try to go above 2%, go ahead, but you risk being rocketed back to zero if you miscalculate the votes, which is a basic way to say don't override.
And the school budget vote is really the only budget vote, or one of the few budget votes, that the community actually comes out en masse to vote for. Whether there's, who comes out, or the numbers that actually come out, really depends on the community in which you live. So if the community at large says, we appreciate what's going on in our schools, we want to maintain home values, we appreciate the need for strong educational programs, we support public education, it seems to me that the whole conversation is to undermine public education in this state. And it's going to be very similar to what happened in California, where you had Proposition 13, and there really is a complete default or dismemberment of the public education system.
If there's a vision underneath all of this, and I think it's broader than just education, Peter, I think it goes back, and either Norm said this or somebody else did, and I picked up on it once already. There are too many small governments. I really do, but this is the underlying reality under everything. Too many small governments, and we're going to create structures, as the bill that was passed a couple of years ago for villages and towns. We're going to create structures and pressures that's going to make you merge. It's going to make you merge. And by the way, when you merge, okay, now twice the voters of Rye City have rejected a merger of the Rye City-Rye Neck School District. But from the top down, we think those districts ought to merge and they ought to throw Mamaroneck into it too. And that merged entity, we just think is a better thing. We think that the village of Larchmont should no longer exist. It should be subsumed into a town of Mamaroneck, and probably it should be the greater town of Mamaroneck that includes Rye Neck, and that's what we think should happen. And you should have one person and one board governing that, not three, and one police department. So now, with that vision underneath it, we're going to make it tough for you to function the way you are, so that at some point in time you just go to the guy next and say, you know, I just can't survive on my own anymore. We're going to have to do this. And notwithstanding everything I said before, I believe that that is a vision that's created by people who don't understand. I mean, they're not stupid, but they don't see how strongly somebody fights to live in an area to send their kids to Murray Avenue School. If they wanted to move to another community, they would have. But they didn't. They bought a house here for these reasons. They see, well, that's the elementary school. That's where I want my kid to go to school. You want to merge it, you want to save money, you're going to start closing schools, you're going to close a firehouse, you're going to merge things. Well, you know, that's not what I bought. There's a school of thought that says if you raise taxes enough, people are going to go to Connecticut. I also think if you don't handle this process properly, people are going to go to Connecticut. They're going to say, you know, I didn't go to Rye Brook so that you could take away my local elementary school. I'll see you later. I'm in Rowayton. You know? So it has to be handled intelligently, not just emotionally.
We're in the back, and we're beginning to run out of time.
I think may contradict some of what's been said, but I think there's a very positive side to the tax cap concept, and that is it's focusing the light on the mandates and the unsustainability of the mandates and the unsustainability of the state government. And you try and tell me that without these kind of catalysts that they're going to change anything. The other thing, the idea that this is a rich community. I'm the commander of the Veterans of Foreign Wars. I'm a retiree. We have a lot of retirees. This community, the strength of this community, I've lived here for over 25 years, is its heterogeneity, not its homogeneity. So everybody is not ready, oh, let's have a 4%, 5%, that's all fine. It's not all fine, unless you want to drive a lot of people out of the community and change it into a homogeneous community. So the idea of, well, we'll get out from under this and then we can get what we want, that's no answer. The answer is the pressure, the mandate, pressure on the mandate either before or after. Because if you pass this tax cap, that pressure will happen before, and it will continue to happen because basically people will say, hey, you know, we've given up this, given up that, given up something else. There's a better way. There's a better way because my commitments that we've made in terms of benefits and pensions to public employees is non-sustainable. So we have to do something about it. So.
Harold, and then I'm going to have to.
I'd like to ask both speakers under the law as it's the proposed law as it's currently written. Can our municipalities charge fees for snow plowing, for garbage and other services, and get income through that route?
Snow plowing, no. We can charge, set up garbage on, let's say, a pay-as-you-throw basis, so that the organizations, the businesses, the communities, that the homeowners who create more garbage end up paying to dispose of that garbage. Right now, let's say a family of 2 or 3 or 4 who don't produce as much garbage as a restaurant pays as much in taxes equalized as the restaurant does. So they're subsidizing each other.
There is a relief through fee charges to bring in more income?
There is relief. The only thing is, keep in mind on the tax fairness issue, once you turn that garbage collection cost into a fee, you can no longer deduct it from your higher level taxes. Because it's built into the tax rate, you make it a fee, it's just like your water rates, you can't reduce it from what your federal or state income is.
There's one other thing, Harold, to put into this factor. New Rochelle had a municipal tax cap for a number of years, which was built into state legislation when they got an extension of sales tax. During that period of time, they levied a garbage fee. And that garbage fee to the average homeowner was tax structured a different way. And in some ways unfair for some people depending on how they were structured. But there are certain services, as Rich said, and this bill is silent on those. It's whatever the existing policy is. The county could create a system by which you are charged per usage of sewerage. It's hard to do, but if you could come up with the physical way to do that.
You just put a little meter.
Put a meter on this.
Yeah. That's right. Actually,
credit card.
Yeah, well, that's it. The swipe card. Honey, I've got to go to the restroom 3 times tonight. I'm 58. Well, bring the swipe card with you, George.
That is an old age tax.
So the bottom line is that it is possible for governments to segment some fees, but to the average consumer, it's not going to feel like it's something better. It's just a different component to put the same amount of dollars in. I would add this. I have a bill in to give local governments the ability to sell naming rights, lease naming rights. Now that sounds pretty crummy, on one level of it. You know Flint Park is Flint Park. You don't want it to be PepsiCo Park. But the bottom line is, if you give, that's fair enough. Probably because MasterCard will outbid them. But the bottom line is, when you create structures like this is in essence what Bert said. When you create tough time structures, then you have to give other tools to work with. And those other tools will do things that you may not like, but they're being done out of the need to do something. And I don't think for a minute that Larchmont would take advantage of that particular provision, but there are communities that would.
Well, George, take a step back. Just regardless of naming rights to a park, villages and municipalities cannot sell advertisement in our local parks. So if we have ball fields and things like that, we can't set up billboards and try to earn money to help offset the cost of their operation. So
this is all under that. It gives you greater opportunity to lease whatever's within your thing for whatever purpose, to get additional revenue.
Steve, we have the last word because we're one way over.
I want to go back to something that you said, George, about the fact that the state would like to impose this tax cap as a way to force us to be bigger and consolidate towns and villages and school districts. The bottom line is, if you look throughout the state and look at the abuses of expenditures, the abuses of pension padding, it's happening in the big governments. It's not happening in the little governments. The little governments, as you mentioned, have this sense of accountability that big governments just don't have. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I think the greatest efficiency is in the smaller towns and villages. And I think we are a good example of where there have been opportunities for consolidation and sharing. We do it, and we do it naturally. We don't do it by force from the state government. And since we have such a limited number of ways to draw revenues, we don't have the ability the state does to have sales tax and stock transfer tax. We don't have that. We have the property tax and a little bit of sales tax. That's what I think makes this idea that bigger is better is real problematic.
I had to, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying it's 9:15 and we have gone way over, and I did turn my clock back, but still it's getting up there. So I'm going to have to give people who need to move on a chance to move on, and if others want to hang around for a few more minutes, that'd be wonderful.